I'm gonna click to record this, and here we go. Okay, well, welcome, Paul Kirschner. Thank you for joining me this morning here, this afternoon, across the pond, so to speak. And thank you so much. As you know, I teach a course here at the University of Texas at Arlington called Debunking and Evaluating Educational Interventions. It's the first time I'd ever taught a course like that was a year ago. Honestly, I never thought I'd be able to teach a course like that, but part of the great thing about academic freedom, as you know, which is, becoming scarce, is being able to do something like that. And, in the design of the curriculum of the course, it's kind of like, well, we should do everything that Paul Kirschner has done in his life, because you are definitely one of the people who have started this, I think. As a young guy coming up through my profession, you have always inspired me in terms of not only conducting quality research, but also, not being afraid to take things on, and also, not being afraid to say what needs to be said, even though there's a lot of people out there that probably don't like hearing that. So I've
Thank you.
always respected the fact that you've done that. So it's a real honor for me to speak with you today via Zoom.
I think you're being very modest, because you've written also some very nice things about busting myths and things like that. So don't be too modest about yourself.
Well, I think I'm perceived in a much more evil way than you are. So I have to try to model what you do more, so that people perceive me a little less evil and more positively. But I'm working on that. But anyway, as you know, Paul, I wanted to ask you a few questions today. The first one is sort of, as you proceeded through your professional career, at what point did you feel like, instead of just producing research, perhaps I should do some of this debunking, or, trying to alert people to some things that really aren't so great about what we're promoting in our field?
Oh, good question. Good question, Dan. I think, I don't know if there's one watershed moment or one epiphany, but it's kind of like you do research and you write articles, and based upon the research, you kind of have this idea of, okay, I know what empirical evidence tells me we should actually be doing. And every once in a while, I would venture outside of the realm of academia. I'm talking like not going to AERA or something like that. And I would be giving a lecture or reading to teachers. And I would tell them something, or I would explain something, and I'd notice that they were hindered in what they were doing because of the misconceptions that they had. And once that happens a number of times, you kind of lose faith in the fact that just doing good research and presenting it, and sometimes even presenting it in a way that you can communicate it, so let's call it in layman's language, that isn't enough, that sometimes you have to debunk what they think, in order to get them to think, people to think in a different way. And that's not easy. I mean, we've seen it with COVID. We see it with all different types of conspiracy theories. I mean, in the United States, you're really world champions in conspiracy theories. But we see it there, but we also see it quite a lot in education. And you'll tell people, for example, you'll show people that something like multitasking, that you can't do it. Yeah. But they'll say, yeah, but women can do it, but I can do it. And, like you'll say, well, there's no such thing as a learning style we're talking about. And they'll say to me, yeah, but the way I have a student, and I usually say, well, do you have another anecdote? And we can call those two pieces of anecdote data. But it reached the point where I thought I need to devote quite a lot of time, not only into getting the message out about what works, but also getting the message out about what doesn't work. And what doesn't work can be split into two categories. You do it, it doesn't work. Okay, you put in effort and time and money and it didn't work. But you also have things that you do that can hinder learning, that can have a negative effect. Yeah, what Ernie Rothkopf named mathemathantic activities. So I decided I need to not only present mathemagenic activities, but also combat mathemathantic activities. By the way, for people who don't know it, Ernst Rothkopf coined the phrase mathemagenic, and that means things that give birth to learning. And Dick Clark coined the phrase mathemathantic, things which kill learning.
You've identified two more of my heroes in the field, Dick Clark and Ernie Rothkopf, and I appreciate the distinction. You mentioned that you started sort of discovering many of these misconceptions when you sort of go out into the schools and talk to teachers and things like that. I have the same experiences, especially when teachers take graduate classes and you find out some of these misconceptions. However, let me be a little bit more pessimistic and say that some of these misconceptions are prevalent within higher education and especially colleges of education. It's shocking to see how many syllabi in college courses and even graduate level courses include things such as learning styles, multiple intelligence theory, the Myers-Briggs type indicator, things like that. So what has been your experience? Hopefully things are better in Europe. No?
No, I can give you a very simple answer to that. NCTQ, the National Council on Teacher Quality, did a really nice piece of research looking to see which of Dunlowski's et al., Mitch Nathan, Catherine's work, which ones were found in the courses and syllabi in 40 different teacher colleges in the United States. And it was kind of, an eye-opener that a lot of it wasn't even taught, let alone taught in a way that teachers can really make use of it, understand it, know how to use it. So we did a follow-up study, a kind of a replication in the Netherlands and Brussels and Belgium in Flanders, with only 2 of the 6, and that was space practice and retrieval practice. And we got the exact same results. It's not being taught properly, and taught properly means what it is, how it's used, the theory behind it, and references to the original research so that students can read it. What you did find are multiple intelligences, learning styles, things like that. So I'm just as pessimistic about it. There was a good article that maybe I can send it to you. Maybe it's the teacher colleges that are propagating the wrong things, that are to blame for that teachers don't know the way things work. So we again go into that dichotomy of, on the one hand, they should be teaching good cognitive science. As John Sweller said, if you don't understand how the brain works, you're, well, I'll put it in my terms, you're flying blind. Yeah, you can't properly design instruction. So on the one hand, we find that the teacher training colleges, the universities, are not teaching the things that work. But on the other hand, they are teaching the things that don't work. And these teachers who are teaching that are the products of the teachers before them. And you can see at a certain point in time, what was known as progressive education took hold, and myths sprouted up, and the teachers and their teachers and their teachers, that's 3 generations at least that have been brought up to think that learning styles work, that discovery learning is the way to learn, that if you motivate kids, they'll learn, instead of if they learn, they get motivated, those types of things. We have a number of generations doing this. So the teachers that are teaching the teachers who are teaching the teachers, they haven't learned proper cognitive science. I always compare that to, could you conceive of a doctor that didn't learn anatomy, physiology, and pathology. I don't think you could. And if you could, you wouldn't want to go to that person. But we do have teachers who don't understand how our cognitive architecture works, how our working memory works, and how we can bypass the problems, the bottleneck that our working memory gives us. So we have essentially doctors who know no physiology, anatomy, and pathology. And that's the problem.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'll just add one more thing, as long as we're on the road to pessimism here. Not only are these things taught in our teacher education programs, but once students graduate with their bachelor's degree here in the United States, most states require them to pass a certification exam before they can teach. And those certification exams are all often polluted with items on learning styles and things like that. So it's almost, just spread throughout the misinformation, the myths, and luckily people like you are working hard to try to bust some of these. Let me ask you, you've been in the field a while, even longer than I have. Is there a particular time when you stopped and noticed like, hey, things are getting really bad? Or have they been bad throughout your career?
No, there was a moment, and that was in the 90s, when I won't mention any names because I don't think that should be, but when this type of alternative form of teaching in which it was strange. In the Netherlands, it was the case, and you have to realize I've been in the Netherlands since the 70s. It was the case that at the end, in the middle to the end of the 90s, this book came out from 3 authors. And what they actually said in the book was that that which we already have, yeah, is okay, but there are certain things that are now more needed. And that's kind of like, okay, we need to work together more. Yeah. And that was called New Learning. That was what the book was called. It was about new learning. And what you often see is at that point in time, policymakers, politicians, universities, teacher training colleges, and everything grab that. And so we have this new type of learning. It's all based upon collaborative learning, discovery, inquiry, those types of things. What the book actually meant to say was, now 95% is okay, very good at this moment, but we need to add something to it. And they choose something called new learning, and all of a sudden, old learning was passé. Everything had to be done by collaborative learning, social constructivism, discovery, inquiry, standing in front, teaching, giving explicit instruction. That was bad. And that happened, yeah, somewhere in the 90s. I saw the balance go from, okay, what we're doing is okay, and let's expand it, to let's throw out the old, throw out the baby with the bathwater. And that was for me the moment that I began to become frustrated and say, but why?
Yeah, yeah,
And that's when people started saying, well, explicit instruction is standing in front of a group of people and giving a lecture. And I said, have you ever actually looked at what Barak Rosenshine has written and what he has said? And you know that that's not the case. I always give an analogy of me with my granddaughter teaching her how to cross an intersection, and how it's an incredibly fun experience between the two of us, but it's pure explicit instruction. Small step, checking what she already knows, small steps, checking for understanding, constantly asking questions, allowing practice with a lot of guidance and support, making sure that a high success rate is achieved, because I always say I only had at that point in time one granddaughter, and I didn't want her to be able to cross the road 80% of the time safely. I wanted it 100% of the time. And you explain that and you say, hey, I'm talking about a 5-year-old child, and this is pure explicit instruction. And they look at me and they say, oh, it's not lecturing. It's really interactive. You're really giving her a lot of chances to do things, to think for herself, to experience it. And I say, of course, that's called good teaching. And that's what explicit instruction is. Yeah, you're a teacher. It's your job to instruct. And sometimes a light bulb goes off. You see that light bulb and they understand, oh, that's explicit instruction. I always thought it was giving a lecture for 45 minutes and then giving homework. Those are the myths I try to break.
Yeah,
Also,
that's excellent. You know, for me, it was in the 90s. You know, I always attended the annual meeting of the American Educational Research Association, which in previous years always showcased the top scientists in
yeah,
educational research, and there was some really useful information there. But you know, today the AERA meeting as they have it in the program, you know, I'm pretty pessimistic, but I would say there's less than 10%
yeah.
there that is of any interest whatsoever, and probably that is based on good solid science. So people
I
like you
completely
have
agree
stopped
with you.
going.
I
Yeah,
stopped going. It just doesn't. I mean, I went for a number of years when my university paid for it, um, only to see other people. I almost never went to the sessions because I'd look and I'd go to it, and if it looked interesting, it often ended up not being what I thought it was going to be. And if it had anything to do with what I thought it was going to be, it was usually poor research. And it was mostly dealing with things like equity, equality, really important things. But the AERA used to be primarily a cognitive scientific conference, and now it's become almost a social psychological conference.
yeah,
And so I've stopped.
yeah. And I agree. It's mainly about social justice, which you and I would both agree is a very important issue. But they seem to have pushed out educational research.
Well, they don't
Yeah,
understand it then.
yeah, yeah,
For me, when you're talking about equity and equality and social justice, you want you need a knowledge base in order to be a good citizen. You have to know about the trias politique. That's for people who don't know Latin. That you have an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch. If you haven't learned about that, you can't be a good citizen. Yeah. So equality, almost all research shows that if you want to close the knowledge gap, you have to give good Kenneth rich curricula and teach in a knowledge rich way. I mean, look at E.D. Hirsch. You know, I've had the opportunity to meet him. He's an incredible man. And yeah, when you're my age, you have met those types of people. You've met Barak Rosenshine and things like that. Um, People don't understand that social justice means giving everybody the proper knowledge base so that they can function good in a society. And those who look at it in a different way actually only tend to increase the gap instead of decreasing it.
You mentioned, Paul, that a lot of the research today is on how increasing motivation might increase learning instead of the other way around, which you and I would both agree is probably more likely. My colleagues and I just recently completed another sort of analysis of what's being published in our educational psychology journals, and I don't know if you're familiar with some of the stuff we did in the last 20 years, but in the short of it, we found that intervention research, experimental research, is becoming more and more rare.
Yeah,
And what we found in the latest analysis that hopefully we'll publish soon is that not only is correlational research sort of taking over and experimental research is becoming more and more rare, but the recommendations for practice based on correlations
yeah,
is exploding. And now about 2/3 of the articles that either have qualitative methods, observational methods, correlational methods, non-intervention methods are accompanied with recommendations for practice. What do you think of that trend? in our field?
I'll send you a copy of an article you can distribute. I'll send the link because it can be downloaded from ResearchGate, in which John Sweller, Lynn, and forget the fourth author's name. Doesn't matter. Actually show that that educational policy is being dominated by correlational program studies to the detriment of teaching and learning. And it's not that you can't make use of program research, but it's hard to draw conclusions from it because there are so many different variables and it's almost all correlational that you don't know if you find something that works, why it works, and whether or not it was causal or what was causal in the situation. So unfortunately, I have it on my other computer on my desktop. Otherwise, I could have opened it and read the title to you and everything. I tweeted it actually today, so you can find it if you look at my feed today. I tweeted about it, but I completely agree with you on that. And that's also the idea of if you do an intervention study, it's not ecologically valid. And you can do quite ecologically valid intervention studies in quite large groups. And it's important to first do the small scale studies. I mean, people are screaming, the same people who are screaming that the COVID vaccine was only tested in the lab and wasn't tested in the schools. Yeah, and or actually are saying there wasn't enough time to do the lab studies on it and slowly bring it out. Those are the same people who are saying, well, those lab studies in education don't work. And only if you do it in the real world. And you say, you know, like with COVID, okay, we're doing it in the real world. And they say, but yeah, but you didn't do enough lab studies. And how do we know that it works? And that's the type of thing that's going on at the moment. It's sometimes completely illogical.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you and I would both agree that we've seen some extreme ridiculousness over the past few years,
Yep.
outside of education even. Let
Yep.
me wrap up our conversation today because I know that you're a incredibly busy man. Beyond doing the things that you do in terms of pointing things out, writing articles, tweeting about things, so on, what would be your call to action for other people in the field to address this problem of misconceptions, miscommunication in the field of educational research?
No, I think that if I could solve that problem, you could either nominate me for a Nobel Prize or call up the Pope and have me sanctified or whatever it's called in the Catholic Church.
Canonized after you die.
Canonized, yeah.
Yeah, after you die.
I think the most important thing that we can do in the short term is to reform our teacher training, to look at the work done by David Berliner and Lee Schulman. Lee Schulman in his presidential speech at AERA in the 80s, in which he compared what was needed to become a teacher in 1875 in California with 1975, and found that almost all of the content of how you learn and all of the content about the domain in which you're teaching had been removed from the qualifications of teachers. And I think it's in the first or the second chapter of my new book, How Teaching Happens, along with Carl Hendrick and Jim Heel from Deans for Impact. We discussed that, and I think we need to radically change teacher training colleges. We need to radically change the way teachers are certified so that we get teachers who, in an analogous way, know the anatomy, physiology, and pathology of learning. And until we do that, we're just going to be mucking around in the mire.
Yeah, I think you've summed it up perfectly, and that's kind of what we're doing right now. So,
Yeah,
Paul,
I've,
it's been a real pleasure to chat. I know you and I haven't chatted face to face, so to speak, for a very long time. It's great to see you. And once again, please keep doing what you're doing, because your work inspires me, and I know a lot of other folks. And you're one of the good guys, so to speak,
thank you very
in the
much.
field. So thank you so much, and look forward to continue having conversations
Yep.
with you. And thanks so much for your time today. This is very great.
Well, two things. Let's publish together. Yeah, that's a great way to constantly interact and pick each other's brains. So you're still working. I'm retired, so I'll leave that to you. If it doesn't happen, it's your fault. And the second point, take care of yourself on that motorcycle, man. Don't you know how dangerous motorcycles are? We can't afford to lose you. There aren't very many of us. Please
I,
take care.
I appreciate that, Paul. And while we still have the record button on, just so you know, I am probably the most cautious, scared motorcycle rider out there. I was just driving with my wife the other day, finding a nice, safe route to another lunch place. So I don't go over 35 miles per hour, rarely, and full gear all the time. So
Okay.
thank you. I appreciate your concern. And again, thank you so much for your time today. And just really appreciate having you. You have a good rest of your day.
Okay. Thank you very, very much.
Take
And I
care.
hope your students profit a little bit from this.
Thank you, Paul. Goodbye.
Bye bye.